thinking like an innovator. It starts with conceptual thinking and moves on to creativity, which gives fuel to problem solving, and the groove is the tactical techniques of how to execute as an innovator. And this is the foundation of the book Dr. Cho is currently writing, if I can ever get to it. Anyway, before I start diving into conceptual thinking, I want to talk about some of the ideas and the other domains of how people think and look at problems. Annie Duke talks about how you are biased, and your biases become your beliefs. That's how we make decisions based on those biases. We have a belief, questions posed to us, we refer to our beliefs, and our beliefs subsequently become our actions, and that's how we respond. However, the problem is the process everybody thinks we work from is that you have a belief, you make an action, you get information back. Based on that information, if there's something wrong with your belief, then you change the information to make your belief system better. Here's the problem, though. Most people don't do that. Most people, what they do is, regardless of what happens, based on your biases and your beliefs, that you fit those around what happens in the outside world. We don't look for how we improve, but basically how we can support what we currently do. And that's a very big problem. And finally, we view the outcome of our actions and our decisions we look at as being success and failure. And that's wrong. You can't look at it as success and failure. You have to look at it as luck and skill. And the reason why is anytime you have uncertainty, you can have a random occurrence, which we refer to as bad luck, low probability event that takes place. In another life, I used to play a lot of poker. I played poker in Vegas and Southern California card rooms. I played low stakes because I just did it mostly for entertainment. But anyway, once I was in Vegas and I had 3 aces, I knew the other guy had 3 queens, and so we're betting into each other because I've got the lead. And then some other people hit their hands, which just gave me the opportunity to make more money. And then I hit my full house, and he hit his full house. And so I'm raising the whole way. And then what happens? On the very last card of the hand, he draws a 4th queen. Now I raise him, he raises me back. And I'm not like, is he trying to bluff me? Let's see how much he likes his hand. So I raised him back, and he raised me back, and I went, uh-oh. And so I called him, and as it turns out, a very large pot, and I lost. And I was there like, son of a bitch, he beat me on a 4% draw. And again, the way to think about a 4% draw is I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 25. If you can guess it, then you win. Not crazy, but not very likely either. And so does this mean that next time I play a hand like this, I think, oh, I shouldn't do that because I had failure in the past, so I'm going to play conservative? No. There was nothing wrong with the process. The problem was I just got unlucky. And so, in a sense, it was a success, but the outcome was failure. And it works the other way around, too. Sometimes your successes were just due to good luck. Nothing that you did. For example, if you play video games or something like that, you want to like hit a ball or something a certain way, you don't, and then the outcome's really good. It doesn't mean that you're good. It just means that you got lucky. And so that's the way we need to look at things. And this gets into the mentality of doing the right things as opposed to the things that you think you're good at. This is why a lot of companies get in trouble. They think their success means that they're good, but they didn't realize, did the outcome happen because of our skill, or did it happen due to luck? The thing is, you can't control luck, you can't design to luck. So what you need to do is understand how things come out with skill. The way we look at problems is some of the 3 major domains is one is trees, which is about finding analogies. This was started by the Russians. It was popular for a while. I think people are getting away from it now. But what the Russians pretty much said is that every problem on Earth has already been solved. So it's just a matter of finding out where that answer exists. First principles, this has been around for a very, very long time, but because Elon Musk talked about it, it's gotten a lot of popularity. But what first principles mean is that you have all these details in a problem. So strip away all the details and find where the first principle is and work from that principle. What is the base law that's taking place here? And systems thinking is you have all this information in space. What is that information telling you? What's actually related from one thing to another? Now, each of them have its strengths. Each of them has its weaknesses. And when you put first principles and systems thinking together, that's where you come up with conceptual thinking. Trees, what it pretty much comes down to is they have 40 different kinds of outcomes. And so based on the problem, you can pretty much look up what it is. Very popular for engineering firms for a while, but here's the limitation of trees. It's based on information that already exists, so it takes away from creativity and other aspects, and that's why it doesn't translate well for entrepreneurs. The thing is, people tend to use analogy to solve problems, and so you make assumptions, and you don't challenge those assumptions. And so this is what the strength of the first principle thinker is. Musk talks about how you got to get rid of all the crap to get to the real question that you're trying to answer. And there's some limitations on what he's seeing in that, because how do you know what's crap and what's not crap? You identify your assumptions and challenge it. You break it down to first principle, which is basic function. You create a solution from that first principle. And there's a lot of truth to this. The way I solved very complex problems in engineering is I was always a first principle thinker. I was doing this long before Musk was doing it. And the reason why is there's a lot of detail, but fundamentally there's some fundamental law or something that something has to answer to. And when you're solving problems, a lot of times these fundamental laws conflict with each other. And that's your opportunity for innovation. How do I get these two conflicting requirements that I can't get around to work together? Here's an example of challenging your assumptions. Einstein's theory in special relativity, is E equals mc squared. Now, you can't do anything about mass. Mass is what it is. It's, the number of molecules or atoms or whatever. However, you can challenge c squared, the speed of light. Now, actually, Einstein didn't come up with the speed of light. Maxwell actually came up with it long before Einstein did. But here's the thing. The assumption is that the speed of light is a constant. If we ever find out the speed of light is not a constant, then all of a sudden all of Einstein's theories collapse. And that's why a lot of physicists right now are going down that avenue. Challenge your assumptions. The thing about Musk is he's done all kinds of different things, like rockets and batteries, and what he does is he just studies a new field, understands its issues. But the thing is, he's not the best at chemistry or anything else. What he is smart enough to do, and I've done the same thing in my career, is understand what the issues are and understand how to ask questions. And then it pretty much comes down to leadership. It says, challenge your assumptions. And yet, anytime anyone ever challenges him, what happens? You get thrown off his platform, you get fired. So let's just say there's some inconsistencies there. He says one thing, but he doesn't necessarily act in another that supports it. Some of the limitations of first principles is there could be times you oversimplify things and don't see the context. Here's part of the problem. You can be biased. And it's because Musk is fundamentally a physicist. The thing is, a chemist might look at the problem in a different way, and better answers might exist there. And what he really left out, though, and this is the thing about engineers, is what do, especially physical engineers? We challenge the laws of nature, and we bend it to our will. We change systems to make it work the way we want it to work. And what he kind of left out is that he says you distill it down to first principle. But maybe that first principle is very difficult to work with. What you can do is change the way something operates in, and so another principle then becomes dominant. And so first principles, he makes it sound like it's the bedrock and foundation of everything, but actually it all depends on what's around it that determines whether or not that's going to dominate or not dominate. And so that takes away your creativity if you're purely a first principle thinker. Not only that, but analogy might be valid. In certain situations, it's not valid. In certain situations, it is valid. And so you remove that from your solution set. Again, pendulums. Nothing is absolute. The system thinker is a subset of critical thinking. What critical thinking is, and people like to throw it around, but it's making a connection from one thing to another thing. System thinking is adaptive in nature, and it tends to remove analogy from the solution set because you look at what actually exists and what relationships exist. The system thinker is about how are things connected, how do you emerge beyond silos, the way things are connected, how do you synthesize things together, get feedback, and understand the root cause. And in effect, what the system thinkers are about is they're always telling stories, that you map out what all this information is and what is it telling you. And if you can say it concisely and cleanly, you have a story. The conceptual thinker, again, your successes and failures in life will be about the decisions you make. But how do you know you're looking at the right thing or asking the right question? The thing about conceptual thinkers is that people who aren't conceptual thinkers, and most people aren't, you have all this data in front of you and all this information. What it looks like is this. Most people are serial thinkers. They look at details, and then when you ask them a question, what do? They go for the low-hanging fruit, the easiest thing to think of. Your own professors do this. Trust me, I've been in meetings with them. And something comes up, and what does everyone do? Everybody wants to talk, and they talk about their biases according to what their profession is, and they go for the low-hanging fruit. On the other hand, conceptual thinkers will take a moment and look at everything in its entirety. And what they see isn't that. They see this. And all of a sudden they understand how everything's interconnected and what the story is. How much data do you see here? Is it 16 pieces? Maybe it's only 9. Maybe it's 2. This is what conceptual thinkers do. By seeing how things are related, you make it simpler to look at. This is what AI and machine learning is all based on. It's about taking information and understanding what pattern it creates. It makes the complex simple. Also, in a sea of knowledge, it tells us where we should be looking to go find an answer. It makes the complex simple, it gives us greater insight, and it's timeless. Details change, but concepts don't. And so this is why someone, through their learning in education, can basically get an engineering degree and have a 40-year degree, a 40-year career, even though after 5 years their knowledge obsolesces. You can assess more information, you can understand functions. This is the way people solve problems. We identify it, we analyze it, and then we execute and close. How do we learn? How do we use information and feed it back so the next time we bring better solutions to the table? Well, the way we learn is either through behaviorally, and that's that we make association between our stimuli and responses, and that's somewhat limiting. Cognitive is the internal processes that we use to learn. We evolve our knowledge base. And constructivist is that we construct our own words based on knowledge and experience. And this is where creativity comes from. So how do we think? Well, there's different kinds of ways we think. And our knowledge is either shallow or deep. And if we analyze something in a deeper way, we're more likely to access it. So how does it work? I need some information. A problem comes up and I need to make a choice or decision. And so what does my brain do? You can think of your memory as being an infinite hallway. And so what ends up happening is that the things that you've used most recently are easiest to recall. How many times has somebody asked you a question and then all of a sudden you don't know the answer, but then like 10 hours later the answer pops up into your head? And so it's not so much that it doesn't exist in your memory. What it comes down to is that it's just buried so deep. It took time for the processor in your head to go find that answer. And so the problem is that, in effect, our knowledge becomes serial. How can we do a better job of accessing things? Now, Ebbinghaus, and this is why my approach to teaching, if you ever take a campus course with me, is much, much different than other professors. And this is actually, and of course, I recognize my bias, and that's towards MIT. And the approach of teaching there is the fire hose. They just flood you with information, and you have to, it's like drinking from a fire hose. You have to keep up. But here's what their thinking is. The way you make your notes and everything is extremely important. How do you get that information and look at it later? Because if you don't constantly use it, you're going to forget it. And that forgetfulness happens within days. If you use something all the time, then you'll remember it. If you don't use it, you're going to forget everything. This is part of the reason why these slides are almost like your notes. And you all have access to them and you can keep them over time. My belief is unless you use information consistently, it's too hard to recall. Therefore, you're very better off in storing it. And in finding what information is relevant. This is why I've always been a big note taker. I don't want to reread books, but I am good at taking notes. And so, how do computers sort information? Well, what do you have? You have files, right, in hierarchy. And this is the same idea as concepts. Each of these concepts is basically a hierarchy or a file area. And so this actually allows you, if you remember a concept, then it goes into an entire domain of information. And so instead of just a fact, you have an entire stories that you can access. The thing about serial thinkers is what they do. A problem shows up, they don't know what to make of it, they access their data warehouse. And remember, everybody's lazy. We're mentally lazy. We go pick the easiest question. And it's just natural that we take the path of least resistance. So how do you stock your hallway and find your answers? And so the incremental thinker will think like this, and the conceptual thinker will think like that. That's the way you can think of it. So the situational thinker will rummage through their storehouse of knowledge to find an answer. And the problem is you run the danger of using unconscious thinking. Your unconscious thinking is things that just pop into your head. However, unconscious thinking is based on your training. This is why in the military, what do they make them do? They make them do the same things over and over and over again. And the hope is that when they're under stress or pressure or under fire, that basically their muscle memory and everything else will go straight to what their training actually is, so they don't have to think. Conceptual thinking is how we look at elements and how things work together. And this is our conscious thinking. The thing is, when you work on a problem for a long time, when your work becomes mundane, you shut down and go into autopilot. You don't put a lot of thinking about it. A lot of people stay in the same careers and look at the same problems for a long time, and they become mentally lazy. How do we fight this? I'm going to talk about conceptual thinking, which is the 3 disciplines. These are the 3 disciplines that you need if you want to become a conceptual thinker. How do you build information and understanding, okay, now that I have all this information, what is it telling me? And this is what I refer to as the nature of things. What is the nature of the problem I'm looking at? How to be a good conceptual thinker. You need a clear mind, you need purpose, and you need to know how things connect. Those are the 3 skills that you need. And here are the mindsets that will do it. 1 is an economist focus. The problem is part of your biases are tied to the past, that you want to do things in a certain way. You have to develop what I call the economist focus. Don't look at things in terms of sunk cost. Sunk cost means that something isn't retrievable, and yet you make your decisions based on what's happened in the past. Classic example is the junk car. I buy a junk car and I want to remake it. I've spent $15,000 on it, but I don't have a car that I need to get to work. If I want to buy a used car, it's $10,000. If I want to finish working on this junk car, it's going to cost me $20,000. And so the way people think about it is, but I have $15,000 in this. I can't change yet. Well, the point is, from the sunk cost point of view, it's just cheaper to buy a used car and forget about the other approach. And yet people won't do that because they're tied to the past. When you make decisions, it has to be from this point moving forward. What's the best decision for you? Your goal is to find the truth. It's kind of incredible because the more I read about Bill Belichick, the more I find out I think exactly like him. And Big Belichick, he went to the Super Bowl 9 times in 20 years. Runner-up over those 20 years is the 49ers, who only went to 5 Super Bowls. And they asked Bill Belichick, what's your secret? What's different about it? And Bill Belichick said, you have to treat every year as new. You can't assume that what happened last year is going to happen this year. And so by treating everything as new, then you have a fresh start every time. How many times do you see sports teams, after they have a good season the season before, or they have a run at the end of the season, think it's going to carry over to the next season, and it doesn't. And it's because they're not thinking in terms of sunk cost. You have to treat every year as new. The other mindset you need to deliver, besides not being tied to the past, but looking forward to the future, is the writer's focus. And the difference between professional writers and, again, I was a lit minor and creative writing minor at MIT. They didn't have majors and minors, but I think if you take 10 courses in a field, that counts. Anyway, my writing teacher wrote a note on one of my papers saying you write like a professional writer. And what she meant by that is that professional writers understand why each and every word exists. Why did I use the instead of a? Why did I make the sentence this long instead of that long? There has to be a reason for everything that you do. Writers understand what purpose every word serves. It's really amazing. James Joyce's Ulysses, which is about 200,000 words, he edited every single word in that manuscript, and he did it multiple times. But this is what you need is an attention to detail. And the reason why is it stops autopilot thinking, because you're always looking at and making sure that there's meaning in what you do. It creates a deeper understanding. For example, you can take any one of my designs, and I've been through design reviews, and they'll ask me, why'd you make this 7 microns instead of 8? Why 7? Why did you make this a 90-degree angle instead of a curve? Why did you? And I can answer every question. But what this does is it creates a new focus level for you. Here's the way we accessed information, and that's that there's our unconscious, which just points to us. There's unaware. We're physically present, but not mentally, like a lot of you with your cell phones in class. Autopilot. It just requires very little cognitive capacity on your part because you've done it so many times, like driving. I don't know about you, but sometimes I pull into a parking lot park and it's like, hey, I'm here. And the thing is, we do stupid things in our cars, like let go of the steering wheel to grab something to eat or something like that. And it's because we're just very comfortable. And what happens is that's what happens to people when they're on the job. And focus is when we're at our best. We're mindful. We're aware of the situation around us. And that's when something is new. We're enthusiastic because we haven't seen it before. but that's what the writer's focus gives you. The thing about one of the greatest users of the writer's focus was Steve Jobs. He was never complacent. He was always looking at details. Jobs' inspiration for design was Dieter Rams, who came up with his 10 principles of design. And this is what went into an Apple. Why did they pick keys this large? Why did they pick curved edges? Why is the display only this big? All of this goes into the designers and what they did design. Everything matters. The third discipline that you need to master I call the architect's focus. A window sits in a steeple, that sits in a building, that sits in a neighborhood. This is what architects do. They understand that nothing exists by itself. Everything exists within layers. The question is, do you understand what those layers are? And it helps you understand the nature of things. Also, it helps you see the forest for the trees. Who's really good at seeing the layers of things? Bill Gates. Gates didn't say the problem in our world is we don't have enough computers. Gates realized that things like neonatal care, starvation, and everything else is one of the biggest problems in the world. And that's why he's gone off and tried to fix these things. So, the economist's focus allows us to clean the slate, to clear our minds to possibilities. A writer's intensity makes us look at the pieces. And an architect's focus allows us to see the patterns. And these are why these disciplines are so important. So the data we bring to table, what is it that we're trying to bring together? How relevant is that data and how much of it? That's how we get better solutions. How we gather information, how do we store it, and how do we retrieve it? The better solutions we can create, process and store, and how do we retain it? And subsequently, one of the easiest ways to remember things is stories. Details connect us to the truth of a situation. And if you remember from the story lecture, these are the pieces, the journey that we go on to figure this out. And the payoff is we're uplifted, good story speaks to us, good stories stay with us. So looking at uncertainty, how do we acquire information? How do we process it? And how do we look at it? What are the nature of things? And so we'll get deeper into this in the subsequent lectures.